So welcome everyone. So this one we're going to talk a little bit about the role of technology. Technology is a bit of an enabler, and it's often seen as like the problem solver to solve a lot of challenges we have. And as we all know, this is a terrifically dynamic area, as we've heard, and this year has been just like no different. I guarantee we're going to talk about AI on this one, I'm pretty much sure. So we might have some differing views, maybe, that'd be good. So new data, modeling techniques, customer interest, adoption, I mean, they've all kept us on our toes. It feels like it keeps accelerating. So this session here, we're going to talk a bit about what have we seen this year, what are some of the new areas being looked at, and hopefully some case studies on what works and also what doesn't as well. I mean, if we might even kill some sacred cows as well. So on that, which would be kind of good. And where do we go for the future? Just in terms of data, and this sort of echoes the last point. And no one can read this, I know. But here we're just like looking at like the most popular channels. And what was just interesting on this kind of data is that telephony, as we just heard, comes up as really pretty important. So although we talk about digital and we talk about technology, telephony is also important as well. So I think we'll sort of like talk a little bit about that too. So welcome to the panel, and maybe we talk a bit about some of the changes that we've kind of seen this year, and what's sort of developed this year, and maybe Richard, maybe do you want to start about what kind of you've kind of seen? I think is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
What's the latest, I suppose? What are you working on?
Well, I guess just like everybody in the room, you mentioned it already. It's not the elephant in the room. It's the zoo in the room. It's AI. It's just everywhere. It's been on the horizon for 10 years maybe, and then you get up one morning. It's in your front living room. It's there. And everybody's embracing it from all ends up. So I guess this year has been about looking at how to integrate AI into your business and where do you do that. And from my point of view, I think you've got to look at AI the same way that you look at any form of intelligence. There are degrees of intelligence in AI, just as same as there's degrees of intelligence in the greater population. And you've got to be careful how you deploy that and in what format. If you look at ChatGPT, for example, I think currently it's running live up until 2022 in terms of internet access. And there's a reason for that, because there's a lot of stupid on the internet. So you've got to control that. But that's the big end of AI. And then the short end of AI is your own local data set. And that's the thing that we're kind of looking at now, is how do you get that right and ready for the deployment of AI?
Do you think the focus on particularly ChatGPT, large language models, and all the noise of that, do you think that's taken away from the focus on other digital?
No, I think it's probably changing the way that you look at some of the deployment of existing digital. I think it was Andy's point on the last session, in terms of things like two-way chat, whether that's SMS, web chat, using AI as a prompt is a very useful way of deploying AI. In terms of allowing an agent to have reminders placed before them that they're going to forget. Because let's face it, they're tied up with a list of compliance that they've got to run through in the same call. So while they're thinking about compliance, they're missing the cues from the customer. So AI can be very useful in that traditional digital platform and conversationally as well. So blending the two together. It's interesting that from a conversational point of view, that rate's very high still with customers. And I think it's going to remain so for a while. But you can deploy digital at the side of a conversation. It's not one or the other. The two can run together or separately.
Yeah. I mean, Zara, what's your kind of view? I mean, you've obviously got a wider role other than just collections, also servicing as well, right? So, I mean, what's your kind of view on the noise that's being made around, or the hype that's being made around, particularly around ChatGPT as an example, and like how you do that versus, I don't say more mundane because it's not mundane. It's like other stuff that's very practical, like chatbots and automation, digital portals, which is the stuff we were talking about last year.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's going to be part of the overall strategy. It's not going to be the one thing that everybody's servicing through in its entirety. It's got to fit into the overall plan. So within Jaja, we're very digitally orientated anyway. We believe in putting the power in the customer's hands so that they can self-serve as much as possible. Of course, when they do want to chat with us, that's great, but Chat AI will be a good avenue to help to service some of those simpler queries in a way that is more intuitive, versus the kind of chatbot, based on our version of logic that we've seen before. So I think it is very exciting from that point of view. But even having said that, chat AI is going to develop extensively. Will it get to the point whereby you're unable to differentiate whether it's an individual or a chat AI? I think that's very likely. But having said that, there's still going to be a space for people doing more complex tasks, whether that's through chat or calls. Customers need to interact in different ways. So even though we're predominantly digital, we of course still have human-based support on the phone as well as chat for when customers need it. And that will depend on the circumstance of the customer, but also sometimes their preference as well.
And what do you think the main driver is, though, for businesses to kind of put this technology in? I mean, there's sort of cost control we've talked about before in terms of like keeping costs down or absorbing it for increased volumes. Is it around consumer need or compliance is the other one? I mean, what's sort of the driving force, do you think?
I think it's a mixture of things, isn't it? So actually customers do like things to be convenient. I think we'll have all seen it during the pandemic. There was a big switch of customers moving into self-serve channels. And customers want more of that. They don't want to spend their precious time on banking activity. As an example, we're seeing behaviours change. So they expect that they're able either to self-serve or do it in a very simplistic way. And I think, chatbots, let's face it, they can be pretty frustrating. I'm not going to pick a banking sector one, but I'm sure some of you have interacted with Amazon's version. If you pick the wrong route, then you're stuck there and you have to go back to the beginning and start it all again. I like using chat as a customer, say, of that service, but I'd love that if it actually understood what I was trying to get across, if I was using phrases that it wasn't already programmed with. And that's where I think chat AI is going to fit in.
Okay. I mean, Frank, in terms of like the sector where you work and sort of like, what's your kind of view?
Yeah, obviously I'm from the technology sector, and
Yeah.
we see, hope this is working.
Yeah, that's working now.
We see, change of technology. A couple of things though, AI is not new. It's not like something's happened this year. There's been large language models. There's been structured and unstructured machine learning for years. It's just that the pace of change has been, and some of the marketing hype around it has been much more this year than previously. I personally, I was looking at a report by Contact Babel, the industry analyst, and they looked at the UK contact centre industry across the board, so not just in credit and collections, but more broadly across. And one of the questions they asked, and I thought it was really interesting to see this, was why do people buy technology? Why? What's driving them to buy technology? Number one is still cost efficiency. It's still cost saving. Number two is performance improvements. Number three, should be made number one. Number three is customer experience. Number four was channel preference. And number five was still dealing with some of the system issues around disparate remote and in the office workforce. But for the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a lot in digital transformation. We've seen stats here, I've seen them today, whether it's 65%, 70% of conversations are on the audio channel, and 30% or thereabouts are on the digital channel. For the last 4 or 5 years, a lot of the investment's been made in the digital channels. Rightly so. I think that was to deal with customer preference, to deal with changes of demographics, etc. My view is going forward, a lot more of the investment will be to augment the job of the agent, the job of the human who's at the end of the chain dealing with these complex transactions. Maybe we'll touch a bit more about that.
So you mean that in terms of like augmenting the agent, I suppose, conversation as an example?
Yeah, I mean, to take one of the examples I think Vanessa spoke about this morning, how close are we to machines being empathetic, being truly empathetic, to have human emotions and feelings? I think we'll get there. You see some early signs of it now with, some of the deep fake technology, etc. But I think we're some way away from it, and therefore, having humans to deal with complex conversations that have got a high degree of emotion and distress, I don't see that going away anytime soon. So I would be technology, though, to say there's a lot of chat about data and how can we get data, how can we use data better. Using data while that conversation is happening, being able to pull data, to make decisions, to fill out forms, to take the tedium away on the after-call work notes. That, I think, is where the changes are really going to be between now and, say, I don't know, next 3 years. The number of contact centre seats, 800,000 in the UK today. 3 years' time, do you know what it'll be, Chris? 800,000. Yeah. So it is, you know, there's no panacea. AI isn't going to take people's jobs away. AI isn't going to magically make tasks happen that wouldn't otherwise happen. Think about the different elements of AI and how you want to use them in the business to solve your business problems. But I would say you'll always levitate towards, in the next couple of years, helping the agent.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit earlier around averages, and we talk about on averages. And how much of danger do you think we are with averages versus, let's say, looking at different demographic segments needing different amounts of or preference towards digital or those kind of things versus older segments? I mean, Zara, what's your kind of view? I mean, so I hear what's being said, but are we in danger of looking at averages as well? And sort of like, do we need to be a little bit more nuanced, even in terms of the conversation we're having?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the basic level, we've got to make sure we've got something that really works. I think the aspect with the AI is going to take a lot of learning. So I kind of agree with what's being said there. You know, does it have huge potential? Absolutely. But it's only going to be as good as we set it up and the information that we feed into it. But, you know, it will be able to do very different things. It's going to be able to learn, for example, from all of your historic chats and all of your historic calls to build trend patterns. You know, that might take us to an average type solution, Chris, but I think it will be a better average than, say, we're looking at right now. So, you know, it does get us into that potential to understand customers better. But it's pretty much like every other kind of strategy or solution we put in place. It's going to require monitoring. It's going to require oversight and clear decision making. It's not something you can just, you know, roll out the AI and expect it to work perfectly. It needs to be kind of trained, right? And we need to learn from it as to what's working and what's not working.
I mean, I'll go in there just particularly in terms of like segmentation as an example. So do you have different strategies for different segments of the portfolio, different demographics as an example, those kind of things?
Yeah, I mean, to a degree. I mean, we've both worked in the industry for a long time, right? So we've kind of seen the trends on this towards more and less. From my personal perspective, I think it's good to have a base level of segmentation, but I'm not sure it makes sense to over-engineer it, because I think you end up with something that's way too complex, either to manage well within the business, but also for us to understand that we're delivering the right customer outcomes, potentially, especially under consumer duty, we can get it really wrong by over-segmenting. And I think we can, you know, make really big assumptions. You know, if we go on to other topics, for example, use of open banking data, for example, in segmentation, there's a real danger that we infer information that actually is not correct.
That's not correct,
yeah. You know, there's been some interesting discussions, for example, about, you know, spending on healthcare products, that means they're likely to be vulnerable. Well, actually, it could just be somebody going through IVF treatment, you know? You can't infer that kind of information. So it's kind of the same with segmentation as well. We shouldn't let it run away with itself.
It's the whole problem around false positives to a certain extent, right? So like, because there's any probability to a certain extent.
Yeah. And I think as well, you've got to get back to what is the base service that you're trying to deliver, what is the key messaging that you're trying to deliver, and is it actually really that different when you over-segment?
And I suppose also what I'm hearing is a little bit about the devil's in the detail around implementation as well, right? So if you actually implement these things, I mean, we all get excited when we're sitting at home, watching it on TV or playing with it on our phone or whatever it is, but actually putting that into a collections process can be actually a little bit more complex in terms of data transfer, those kind of things. I mean, Rich, what's your kind of view on that and experience on that? I mean, and particularly what works and what doesn't, do you think? Where should we start?
I think to your point just now, you've got to be very careful with your environment. That average solution question actually is quite intriguing. You've kind of got an average proposition at the moment, an average view of AI, and to your point, Frank, in terms of the amount of attention it's getting in the media now has changed dramatically. So everybody has this perception of AI. The reality is it's going to be a very localized experience. So it's going to be very localized to your business and your data set in terms of the flavor of AI that you're going to deliver. And you've got to be careful that as you bring it into your business that you put it in the right place. You're not over engineering it. The problem with the deep dive is you can lose oxygen quite quickly and just drown in the whole experience. And I think that's the key area that we're looking at. It's a gentle walk in currently.
Frank, you got something burning that you're going to say?
No, it was just our VP of product. He's a bit of a propeller head, and he's really deeply into his AI and his models. And he put what was a fairly simple question into ChatGPT, and first time we gave him one answer, second time we gave him another answer. He said to me, suffering from hallucinations. So people talk about false positives and false negatives. That ChatGPT, has hallucinations. But where it's really good, and where it's had lots and lots of training across multiple languages, is in conversation. And I see it in conversational summary, for example, being able to take quite complex conversations, 15, 20-minute conversations, and summarize them really easily, and then use those summaries as data points. We talked about data, so is the person employed? Has he got dependents? Does he live in a semi-detached or a flat? Them sort of things, I think it's going to be really good for, to pull out data and help summarize it, whether that be in form filling or in just providing data.
That's this whole sort of like co-pilot idea for agents, almost like it feels like that's probably a first place to kind of look on it as a use case.
Yeah, I mean, I think that where we use it in that sort of co-pilot is in real-time conversations, whether they be on web chat or whether they be audio conversations, is basically giving the agent some prompts and guidance during the call that's based on the context of the segment of conversation. So it's a bit like, one of our customers says, it's like having a guardian angel, sitting on your shoulder. But it's yeah, I shouldn't say this. It's not that good, yeah. But it is really useful that the employees who feel that one of the big problems in contact centers is attrition, the time it costs for competency, et cetera. If you invest in technology, and AI is, ChatGPT is one area that helps them do a better job, helps them deliver better customer outcomes, they're more likely to stay, they're more likely to be loyal, and more likely to deliver better customer experience. So using technology for that sort of thing is.
Yeah. And so this will be real time, so like real time transcription. Yeah. So I just remember, I think even 3 years ago we were talking about, is it real time, or is it like post call analysis on voice analytics? And now we're already at real time, and now you're saying you want to overlay that with call analysis.
Yeah, you're overlaying basically real-time transcription, real-time contextual analytics with other sources of data from your knowledge management system, your CRM or whatever, to help the agent navigate that call in as frictionless as manner as possible and deliver a better customer outcome.
Yeah. It's come a long way. I mean, my point was it's come a long way real fast, right? I think 2020 we're probably talking about real time. Is it real time?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at something like, we all go on Teams and stuff, I'm sure. Yeah, if you go on Teams now and do a transcription of the call on Teams, it's transcribed in real time. Yeah. If you're then matching that to your large language models and your categorization that you built in the back, it's very, very easy to get alerts and prompts in real time based on that real time transcription.
So how easy is that to integrate? And I suppose going to Richard and Zara, I mean, like, how useful can that be? I'm not trying to make a sale here, but I was kind of
and I'm not. It's sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's difficult. Yeah, I mean, different telecoms environments are different. In order to make use of something like real-time analytics technology, you need to be able to access both audio and metadata in real time. Yeah. Otherwise, you can't attribute the conversation to the right person.
Yeah. I mean, how close do you think we are for some of these kind of things in terms of Richard and Zara? I mean, like, having worked in lots of different places, and like some places are quicker than others as well, right? So do you think we're going to see it soon, or?
I think the real-time coach proposition is quite an interesting one. That's something that we've been looking at for quite some time with things like Scribe and various other things. There's two things at play when you look at that. One is the technology that sits behind in terms of the AI element, so that it can do everything that Frank's outlined in terms of summary of call, and flags, for example, making sure those are there for the agent. The second piece of this, and this is probably the more challenging piece now, is the hardware. So we have offices in Stratford-upon-Avon and Glasgow, for example. So when you're training out technology like this, you've got regional elements that you've got to consider. And I think we're still quite a way away from putting in a global safe solution into a business where you can walk away from it and go, that's going to work 80% of the time, 100% of the time type situation. It's kind of, can you trust it? Because there's two pieces there to trust. There's the intelligence piece and then there's a hardware piece, and it's bringing the two together, and one's moving much, much faster than the other.
I mean, Zara, what's your kind of view?
Yeah, so I mean, I think data accessibility is key, right? It's only ever going to be as good as what you can feed it. So if you're trying to feed it your live chats or your call transcripts or whatever, it's got to be there and available for it to be able to run. It's an obvious point. You know, we're kind of in a lucky position that we're a relatively new company, so most of our data is centralized. We don't have a spaghetti system of systems, but I think it's definitely got to be set up right in order for it to work well. I think it's nearer than we think in terms of being able to use it in this way. I think the key thing is to kind of go out and investigate with different potential partners, you know, where they're up to on this journey. You know, I think anybody who tells you that they've got it fixed and you can just plug it in and it's going to work perfectly, it's not true. You know, it's going to take a lot of learning, and you're going to have to work quite hard at making it work well. You know, as you've mentioned, first of all, it's going to produce some probably crazy results, right? And then you've got to strike the balance of what do you truly need to use it for. So I think, you know, agents are under pressure. They've got more complex jobs because we're constantly automating and digitizing the more simple work. If a chat AI assistant can help them, then great. But again, it's going to have to be intuitive and helpful rather than just be constantly like, what about this? I found this. What did you think? You know? So it's all about balance, isn't it? I think there's massive potential, but the trick will be in the implementation and the learning on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole different kind of conversation we can have around ESG and like environmental stuff around this kind of stuff as well, which is kind of interesting. But let's not go there. I think one of the questions I wanted to come back on was like, how do you make decisions around this kind of investment, right? So you've only got a limited pool. What's the decision-making process? So is it cost-cutting? We've also got good customer outcomes. There's now a lens we now also need to look through as well. I mean, how do you make these discretionary decisions around where to invest versus not?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it's a lot about your company strategy. So, you know, what I'd be encouraging people to do is really sit down and have a serious conversation about it. You know, how much do you believe it's going to be part of your future organizational strategy versus something that is a trend and you're just going to sit back and see how others utilize it? I think that's a really key part of the equation. I think, though, you know, again, there'll be different ways of doing it. You can decide if you're going for an all-out singing, dancing version, or actually you're just encouraging people to you know, experiment with AI in different parts of the business even before you go customer facing so that you understand it more. So I think it is just about that balance and what's right for your organization. You know, for me within Jaja Finance, we're hugely digitally orientated. This is absolutely, you know, front and center part of our core strategy. So it's kind of an easy decision in that way. And so we will use it for customer servicing. We will use it for agent help. We will use it in other areas besides customer service, but only when it's ready. You know, we will test into that and take very much a test and learn approach to see what's working and roll it out. But, you know, in line with the comments on the previous session, it will be a lot about customer sentiment. You know, there's no point us doing something that makes us think we've got amazing chat efficiency if actually customers hate it. That would be a bad call.
And Richard, what's your kind of view? Different business, different sector slightly. What's your view in terms of like making the discretionary decision around what to invest in versus not? We do tend to get sort of led by popular things rather than things that may add the most value. I mean, what's your kind of best approach on it, do you think?
My role as head of digital is to get very excited about anything in that world. I've got the board to calm me down in terms of what we actually invest in. So we look at the traditional lines, which is return on investment and customer experience. So where we're going to get the benefits quickly in those two areas. So you have to sit down and analyse your position, look at the situation and decide, what am I going to get if I do X, Y? So from our point of view, I guess at the moment, the thing that we're looking at is conversational AI and what we can do there. because that's really an enhancement of an existing service. But it's about expectation as well. I think there was mention earlier about empathy with AI. I think avoid trying to create empathy at all costs with artificial intelligence, because it's going to come across as condescending, because the customer's going to know they're engaged with a machine. We don't expect our washing machine to sympathise with the size of our laundry basket. So don't expect artificial chat to sympathise with your financial position, because customers won't want that. Concentrate on enhancing the chat so it gives the customer something that they need and want.
Very good. Well, I was going to ask a question around, also to ask about things like, one thing we haven't talked about is 100% quality monitoring. I mean, is the goal to be able to do that using more sophisticated techniques like we're just talking about?
Yeah, I'll come on to
Can
that.
I ask your first question first?
I want to say, Richard, to me, buying technology because it's got sex and sizzle and it's attractive and it's all there, them days are gone. Yeah, that in my experience, nobody spends anything on software. We don't spend anything on our personal life unless it does something for us. So it is about return on investment. It's about saying, is that business problem important enough for me to solve, and what's the return on the spend I'm going to get in resolving it? So we see lots and lots of ROI based. My people have lots and lots of return on investment conversations on AI. So your question, Chris, sorry, I'm glad you asked me that one about ESG, by the way. I didn't know what that stood for. So
quality monitoring was like, is that another potential role to use this for?
Yeah, I mean, we
record everything. Now you can quality monitor.
Yeah, I mean, forget CallMiner. Just think about interaction analytics in general. One of the early use cases for analytics was quality monitoring, about moving from sample-based dip testing, 5 calls per agent per week or whatever it may be, into holistic monitoring. So you can then pinpoint and find and filter the calls of interest, whether they be bad calls that we need to, flag up the compliance risk, or great calls that we need to use as examples for training. So I think that with the development of technology, with the improvement of transcription engines, with the capabilities in structured and unstructured machine learning, and topped with conversational AI, I think we're at the stage already today. I know we're certainly doing it for some of our customers, where we are automating quality assurance at a level that is risk acceptable, take your point, at a level that is both accurate and risk acceptable to the business. So I think that the QA is already there, and it's not pervasive by any means, but yeah, I do think we're moving now into that, as I said earlier, into that agent augmentation era rather than the quality assurance for speech analytics.
So last year we sat here and we had a very interesting conversation about the metaverse, and it was really I enjoy it. It was an interesting conversation. What's happened to the metaverse? And we didn't talk about ChatGPT or AI, which we're talking about now. We've had almost like a whole session on it. What are we missing? What's happened to the metaverse first? But then what are we missing sitting here today that we'll be talking about next year? What do you think? Maybe we're still using the metaverse.
Richard's our metaverse expert.
Did we discuss this at the rehearsal that I wasn't at? How do you define metaverse, really, in terms of?
Yeah, augmented reality, the stuff that Mark Zuckerberg was talking about, I suppose. Yeah,
I mean, it's like an opinion whilst you put, your thoughts on it. I think, I don't know much about the metaverse, I'll be honest. It's one of those things that probably because, I'm digitally orientated, but not that much, I struggle with, why would we want to do that? But I think some of the use cases they have found, so for example, for training, whether it's training on medical procedures or things like that, hugely valuable, right? Because they can do things that you couldn't do without that kind of technology. So I think, our task always as humans with this technology is to kind of expand our perspective on how it can be used well, right? And I think sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong, I don't know how many people went and bought art in the metaverse or bought yourself a new garden. Probably not that many, but some people did. But I think that's the thing. It's about finding where it truly fits. Back on the comment earlier around, I think AI could be great for quality monitoring. You know, I was chatting with somebody the other day saying, "Oh, buy our service to fully automate complaints response letters." I'm probably not as into that right now until I can see that actually the chat AI or AI in general is really going to be at that level where it's going to get it. Because otherwise that's going to be an expensive mistake, you know, for the customer in terms of their sentiment, but also when cases then ultimately go to the FOS, it's costly. You know, so it's about kind of finding the fit for the technology. You know, I don't think we can sit here and assume it's going to solve every problem. It won't, but it will solve some of them pretty well.
But just particularly on that though, do we not need to have an overlay of quality checking just like we do on our existing agents to a certain extent? So we need to have quality checking because the other thing that kind of comes up is we kind of assume the computer's always right, and in this case the computer's not always right because it hallucinates. So we have to have quality checking just like we do with our regular agents, right?
Exactly, and you'll get into how are you going to do that monitoring if you've got, you know, different large language models facing off with each other, helping each other learn, picking up each other's mistakes. Are you doing it through some human intervention and data? You know, we need to figure that out, honestly. Yeah. And again, it will be a process of trial and error to see what truly works.
Yeah. So just Richard, go back to the metaverse stuff. I mean, other kind of cases, it's kind of interesting in terms of, has it gone away for the right reasons, or is it still there and there's some potential there? For example, one of the examples might be, for example, looking at, you know, people who've got dementia or people who've got like different vulnerabilities. You can use like augmented reality to try and help train people with some of those. I mean, they were all great ideas. Have we just lost sight of some of those things?
With every evolution of technology, there's something that appears that looks like it's going to be fantastic. Sinclair C5, showing my age a little bit there, but if anybody remembers that looked like it was going to be the new way to get around town. And it was kind of ahead of its time in terms of that electrical vehicle thing, and a bit of a sad story, really. The metaverse is just another huge jump, a combination of everything from augmented reality, AI, machine learning, the whole thing thrown into the pot, going, this is what the world will look like in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, 25 years' time, but today. Is it useful in this environment? I don't think so. We're not living in that type of environment yet. It could be useful. I think to your point, in terms of things like medical research, bigger picture stuff, more important things. Look at the industry that we're in. That we're kind of not looking for a cure for anything. We're looking to service customers. So it's proportionality in how you deploy technology.
Yeah, it's almost like, but sometimes it almost like feels like the hype runs away a little bit from the reality and the reality of implementation. I mean, one of the things I was having a conversation with someone about was actually AI, and particularly the ability to be able to use it for coding can actually accelerate some of the augmented reality piece. So it might be that we're just, I mean, do you think we're just seeing it peaked too early? And it's a bit like the internet, we'll see it sort of disappear after the .com crash and then come back with a vengeance. I mean, views on that?
I think it was the metaverse was a terminology used for the orchestration of lots and lots of different technologies that can be very, very widely spread against lots and lots of different applications. I still think we should actually use ChatGPT and say what happened to the metaverse and see what answer that gives us. It might give us a more accurate answer. But I still think that the technologies are there. The orchestration of those technologies we see in silos today, maybe in medical devices and different industries. So yeah, I mean, I actually do think that in 5 to 10 years we will have augmented reality. We will be able to have, perhaps bridging that empathy gap we spoke about. We have bots that have been trained, virtual agents, avatars, on what you will, that can do, that can represent a human being.
Yeah, I mean, so we heard a bit about the metaverse, and maybe it'll come back. I mean, I'm going to ask, my next question is going to be, so what happened last year with the metaverse? Is the same thing going to happen with ChatGPT? So is this a flash in the pan? And just look what happened this weekend, right? Which is anyone who's using ChatGPT needs to make sure they got a BCP plan, right? So just think of it, it's so new. I'm sure a lot of people were worried about that this weekend, but is it going to be something that's the hype's peaked early and now we're going to get into basically reality? How do you integrate it in systems? How do you integrate it into your process? I mean, are we in the same kind of like hype cycle?
No, I don't think we are in a hype cycle, because as I said before, the AI has been, AI is an umbrella term to the underlying technologies, some of which have been around for a number of years, which we can see are getting better and better. with our own eyes. So I think the concept of AI is here to stay. Certainly there are within the contact center industry lots and lots of applications that are using AI. You know, I used call summarization earlier as one example. Another example would be being able to take a conversation that, say, in collections has been particularly harrowing, you know, with the threat of self-harm or suicide, you know, particularly harrowing for the agent, and being able to tell the supervisor immediately, hey, you know, Frank's had a really bad call, to get him off the phone, yeah? So I can see, it's not going to go away because it's being used, yeah? Whereas the metaverse, to me, was more of a hype orchestration marketing thing.
I mean, I think you're right to pick me up on the language, because AI is a very general term. I should probably use large language models to be more specific, whether that's, because that's really what's happened over the last year, versus more general modeling, I think, and like machine learning and those kind of things. But I mean, Richard, what's your kind of view in terms of whether it's is it going to peak? Are we going to see sort of a lull before it comes back again?
I don't think it's the two are comparable, to be fair. I think augmented reality, it's too vast a universe to pin down right now, but that conversational piece, it's just going to evolve. It's going to look different in 5 years, because it's more of a volcano rather than a flash in the pan. It's a bit of a volcano. It's been bubbling. It's now erupted, and the islands are going to form, and they're going to be very different ecosystems depending on where they're deployed.
Yeah. Zara, what's your kind of view?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's here to stay. I think it's just all going to depend on, you know, already you can see the way we were using it 6-12 months ago is different to how we're using it right now. So, you know, rapid learning is incoming. So I think it's all going to depend on how quickly we can learn and deploy it in a cost-effective way. And then, you know, how well it really works. You know, I think that'll be the only thing that holds it back. But I personally think it's got far more relevance right now than augmented reality, because we can kind of all understand how we utilize it, interact with it on a day-to-day basis, etc. So I think it's definitely here to stay, but how quickly it accelerates will depend a lot on how the tech accelerates and how the application actually happens.
I think my slight concern with it, I suppose, is just, and you've even seen in this conversation, is how much it sucks in the oxygen in the room, in terms of like, to talk about that versus maybe more sort of like pragmatic kind of things that we actually need to get done now. And I suppose I'm going to come back to that now, which is, we talked about all these great ideas. I love talking about it, but what are the pragmatic things that best case, you know, priorities that you think we've got to invest in now? Maybe go, Frank.
So
other than large language models.
I'll refer back to this Contact Babel report that fascinated me. That had lots and lots of stats in there, because I love stats, as you know, Chris. Yeah. So one of the questions they asked were what technologies would you be considering implementing in the next 12 to 24 months? Yeah. And there was 3 technologies that were by far the bigger on the old bar charts than everything else. Robotic process automation, interaction analytics, and surprisingly AI and machine learning. And you know why? And I think they all go hand in hand to a degree. If you can, you know, in the ideal scenario, you would be using interaction analytics that already has AI and machine learning to basically prime the RPA, and take out the tension in the agent's job. So you know, the 3 areas that, you know, the survey said are those 3 areas, and to me it's pretty obvious why.
Yeah, just making the agent job easier.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously supports my argument as well, but yes, it's making the agent job easier. It's taking friction out of the engagement, and it's a reflection that perhaps the 70% of the spend that was made on digital transformation has done its job, and it's done a good job, and it will still need to evolve as the demographics change and the channel mix changes. But I think it's a representation of the fact that where we are now is the number of calls hasn't gone down, the number of agents hasn't gone down. How do we make life easier? Yeah. And that's, I think, where it's going to be deployed.
Richard, what's your view? I mean, things like workforce management, things like you know, call management systems, those kind of things. I mean, those are still there. They're still needed, right? So, I mean, are we getting too distracted? I mean, is the value, I suppose, is the low-hanging fruit there in using what we've got or making it better?
Yeah, it's your final point is making it better. The finessing really begins now, I think, in terms of investment. I think it's the difference between how you look at your business. Do you have a call center or do you have a contact center? Well, I think everybody's call centers are rapidly evolving into contact centers. And I think your statistic earlier of 800,000 seats within the UK, what will that be in 5 years? 800,000. That may be true, it may not be, but I think there'll be fewer headsets. And I think that's the reality, is that the function of the individuals occupying those seats evolves with the technology. So it's about deploying your kit to your agents, to your customers. And there was a point made earlier about, and I think it came from Vanessa, which was quite an interesting one. It's not just businesses that are deploying new technology towards customers. Customers are now taking technology and deploying it back to business, using things like ChatGPT, Bard, whatever it is, to try and do their research, find the answers to questions, buy kit that they think is going to defeat the system. And I think, going back very briefly to the augmented reality, the most fearful thing I would see in that environment would be a Martin Lewis character, because that's where it gets quite interesting in terms of it becomes a bit of a bonfire at that point. But in terms of investment, I think it's about finessing what you've got. So whether you've got a self-service proposition, your comms channels, so whether you're investing in AI chat, two-way SMS, whatever that is, it's about making what you've got better. It's innovation has kind of happened. Maybe now it's time to renovate a little bit.
Yeah. And does that, and so what are some of the top things you think we're kind of missing? So, or need to look at, and what should be the priorities other than
Data.
Data, you think?
Data, yeah. It's always data. The answer to that question is always data. It's where you start and it's where you finish. You've got to get your data sets in order. And you've got to get yourself in a very, very strong position. So whether you're deploying APIs, whether you're deploying conversational AI, it's got to be clean, it's got to be tidy, it's got to be workable. Because if it's none of those things or just one of those things are missing, when you get to the other end of the proposition, everything just falls apart.
And I suppose, Zara, going back to the previous conversation we just had around data as an example, is like, particularly how do we make sure that things aren't more complex? How do we make sure our processes aren't more complex, or it's not more complex for the customer as well? Because that surely has to be a consideration, right? Because we can ask for lots of data, but A, what do we do with it? But then secondly, is it important as well? So it's like, how do we get that balance right?
Yeah, again, I think it's all about the design, isn't it? And making sure that you're really consciously adding data and being clear on how you're going to use it. You know, so from our perspective, we spend a lot of time and energy on making sure we're ingesting the right data from third parties, whether that's CRA data, open banking data, or even partnership data, for example, in the partnership that we've got with Asda to help us to make really quick and instant credit lending decisions. You know, we've had to make sure that we design that in such a way to ensure that, you know, it's a really slick and easy process from the customer's point of view. You know, it feels relatively seamless, but of course that we're capturing the right data, we're storing it in the right place so that then we can, you know, let our machine learning models do their thing and help us to keep evolving forward. So I think that kind of design from the outset is really, really important.
Yeah. Is there a danger that if you don't do it right, you can make things more complex and make processes worse?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you might have an opinion on this as well, but I think, yeah, if you put the data in the wrong place, make it, you know, non-accessible, make the wrong calls, it's, not going to be worth it, which is kind of an obvious point, isn't it? But it makes sense to spend the time to get the design right, do the testing before you kind of go big guns. And it's the same, you know, with AI as well. It's only going to be as good as the data and the teaching and the training that you put into it. So whether it's data or tech, it's all about that.
So I want to go back to, you know, customer journey management, and some of the consumer duty stuff, and some like, you know, we haven't talked a bit about taking friction out. So what's your views around using technology to take friction out? Where should you take friction out versus not? We had a concept earlier around good friction versus bad friction as well. Richard, I don't know if you sort of think about that in terms of like, where is it good to have friction versus not? What role can technology be used to sort of take friction out? Is that a lens to look through?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things to consider. I think you made a point earlier in terms of negative friction, for example, in and around chatbots. The Amazon example was a very good one, by the way. Is making sure that you close any loops that you've got. You've got to do some pretty rigorous testing if you're going to build your own bot. I learned that the hard way. But you've got to do some fairly rigorous testing and take it out and really give it a good kicking. In terms of reducing friction, I think the key element is digital first, and somebody mentioned earlier, I don't know if they're still in the room, probably if looking at the room now, it's 50% chance of gone. But somebody mentioned earlier, do not hide the phone number. And that is absolutely true. Do not be Google, do not be Facebook, do not hide your contact center. Is make every option available. So whether you're engaging with somebody through Royal Mail or digital communication for the first time, or a phone call, if it's a written communication, make sure the phone number's there. If it's a phone call, make sure you mention your digital platforms at the end of the call. Just make sure every door is open for the customer. Let the customer make their decision. And try and reflect everything that would happen with a human within your digital environment. That's how you reduce the friction there. Don't have any doors slamming in the face of a customer just because they're using the call center or a digital channel.
How do you get that balance right in terms of doing that? Is it just
Test
everything,
and learn.
everything for everything, or is it testing?
Test and learn. But you can't approach any of these solutions with a one-stop shop view. In terms of segmentation, customer journey, before you deploy that into a digital environment, you've got to look at how that works in a human environment, see what can be replicated, and then try and replicate it, then test it, and then put it into production. And then listen to what your customers are telling you. Change the way you look at your data as well. We mentioned data, MI. The way in which we would traditionally look at MI 20 years ago, which is about performance, penetration, revenues, is great. There are still important factors to look at. But now we're looking at more marketing type data. What are our customers telling us in terms of when they interact with us? We've got a really interesting statistic that 16% of our customers set up payment plans between midnight and 6 a.m. on the self-service platform. So that's kind of an exciting stat to look at. Then you look at that in more detail. Where are those people standing at midnight? Well, we find out some of them are standing in different time zones, surprise, surprise. So it's actually lunchtime when they're setting up their payment plans. But now we understand our customers a little bit better, so you can start to change your communications as well. And that's key to removing friction as well. It's the content of communications and the timing of communications. And when I say timing, I don't just mean the start of the month, the end of the month, the middle of the month. I mean the time of day that you're sending the communication. If you're sending a communication between 12 and 2, remind people about your self-service options. They might want to take care of business whilst they're in the canteen. If you're talking to people in the middle of the afternoon towards the end of the evening, remind them that the contact center is open until 8 o'clock in the evening, so that when they get home, they can make that call.
And how much investment are you guys making in terms of because it's the analytical, it's the data, but it's also the analytical tools, and then the people to then start to look through some of that as well, which can, and that's an added overhead potentially, to be able to do that to then become more efficient. I mean, is that something that you guys are looking at, or Richard? I mean,
what investing in what? Sorry,
the analytics to look at the data.
Huge. We've. I'm not going to go into numbers, but the level of investment that we've put into analytics now versus 15, 20 years ago is hugely different. Even 5-6 years ago, we have a dedicated division, all dedicated to MI, our decision science team, who are kind of opening an interesting world for us in terms of insight to customer behavior. Not just customer behavior, in terms of the quality. We're telling clients things about their customers that they didn't previously know, with other applications that we're attaching to that. Things like open banking, for example. That's quite an interesting one. It's a bit of a wormhole. But being able to look at your MI with a fresh pair of eyes, bringing people from outside of the industry as well to look at the MI and interpret that for you, because that's critical. How do you interpret the information that you're looking at? So my earlier point, 16% setting up plans between midnight and 6 a.m. Oh, that's interesting. That tells us that everybody's got insomnia, until we look at the data more closely.
So it's quite interesting in terms of when you look at a lot of businesses, like MI and KPI seem to be the first thing that get de-scoped. And yet we're saying we need to have more data. Not only do we need more data, we actually need to have more people to look at the data that's going to be bespoke for, let's say, a collections function, not necessarily spread across the rest of the business. I mean, it's kind of, I understand, but it's like, is that going to be a pressure point, do you think?
I don't think it's more data necessary. It's the way in which you look at your data. It's changing the way that you look at it. There's a very traditional way of looking, from a collections point of view, there's a very traditional way of looking at your data, and it's generally related to performance. But now you have a lot more insight on the same data in terms of communications. You can see, using UTMs, you can track the communications. Who's responding to which email? Was it email 1, email 2? Put a UTM in an SMS now. So you can't see open rates on SMS, but you can see engagement rates. Yeah. And finding out where in the customer journey the customer parachutes either into your digital solution or actually calls the contact center. Yeah.
I mean, I love it, but it's just whether people are investing in it, Frank. What are you kind of seeing?
Well, to take the point that data, one of the biggest consumers, if you like, of solutions like CallMiners is data scientists. Yeah, because at the end of the day, the conversations that organisations have with their customers, whether it's on email, whether it's on the telephone, whether it's on web chat, it's unstructured data. If you can turn that into structured data using AI and machine learning, give it to the data scientists to combine it with other data sources, their predictive analysis, their other models, it's a hugely beneficial thing. So if you can also make the data join up your channels, in the customer, you mentioned customer journey. One of the other use cases we see a lot of is channel breakdown, digital channel breakdown, where there's breakouts into high cost channels, and within the first 20 or 30 seconds of a call that's broken out, you'll probably say, I was trying to do X and it wouldn't let me. I was trying to make a payment. I was trying to file a complaint. When you can capture that information at scale and feed it back as a data source to go and fix the bot, that helps to join the journey together. So I would say a lot of the data exists today. It's about harnessing it and using it in the appropriate manner.
I mean, that is an interesting use case, using large language models to take unstructured data and make it structured. I think that's quite an interesting one. We haven't actually talked about that, but that's quite interesting.
I mean, that's what basically, if someone says, well, what does speech analytics do? That's basically what it does, yeah. It turns unstructured data into structured data.
Yeah. Sorry, you had a comment.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is absolutely the right way to do it, isn't it? With investment, whether it's in, the warehousing, data scientists, etc., it's absolutely the right way. But I think what we shouldn't forget is you can also just use the data that you've got at your fingertips every single day to make great intuitive assessments as to what's happening and make decisions that move the business forward. We've recently launched a new Jaja Banter credit card, and actually, yes, MI, big part of it, but that kind of voice of the floor, even though they're all remote now, was incredibly important to help us be in touch with the trends. So, some of the old things continued. They're still just as good as they were. Yes, we'll get great data, great models, that'll help, but it's the things combined together that really push us on, I think.
I suppose part of it is making sure we don't get sidetracked as well, right?
Yes,
if you've got good
cool
data
new
now,
stuff or the complex
how do you make sure you don't
version?
get sidetracked? Yeah. But then also investing in the right, if you need to look at some of these analytics, which sound great, it's like making sure you got the investment room to be able to look at it as well.
But also as well, it's culture, isn't it? So asking your people, what did you learn today? What did we learn? Where did we fail? What did we learn from that? What did we learn about our customers? It's come up a number of times in this conversation. Having that culture where that is really a core part of the things you're talking about every day, whether you've got a fancy data scientist team or actually you're just using MI and listening to what's happening, both are going to drive value. Yeah. Can we just come back to the point on friction as well in processes? Just a couple of points to make there. So I think, again, you've got to be really deliberate with the friction that you're putting into your processes. It's good to say, we want it to be digital, quick, simple, and easy. But of course, there's some times when you need some friction in the process. So, for example, as part of our new customer onboarding, we use Verif as our ID&V tool, and you could say that some customers historically may have disliked that, but what we find now, and because of the way that we've integrated it into the journey, it feels pretty intuitive, and we get a lot of positive feedback that customers actually love it because they're like, you're keeping me safe, and that I really want that in the process. The other process, I'd call out, and I don't know how relevant it is for the group here, but things like disputes and chargebacks, you know, you need a level of friction in that process. How many of us have looked at our credit card bill and thought, £100 on Saturday? I didn't spend that at that particular retailer. There's no way it was me. But actually, when you go through the process, you realise, oh, yes, you did. It was just with a different retailer, or you've forgotten about it. You know, so some processes do need friction. But again, it's got to be delivered to the customer in a way that feels intuitive, feels that it is the right level. You know, nobody wants to be filling out long forms or a process taking, 20 minutes when it could have took 2. But equally, you've got to strike the right balance.
It does feel like we need some sort of like way of thinking, at least like a model or way of thinking about when's the right friction to have versus not, because it seems like it's one way or the other to a certain extent.
Yeah, and you've got to test into it as well. You know, what we definitely find is what we might think to be a simple way of explaining things, customers might just not get. You know, there's a lot in a word, a colour of a button, the placement of the button on a screen, where the customer's eyes are going first. You know, we do a lot of modelling around that and use tools to help us to see what customers are doing on the page, etc.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So we're almost at the end. So the last question was really predictions. So this is for next year. So it's going to be on the slide next year, I hope. And sort of like, where do we think we'll be? What were you talking about this time next year, and maybe where we'll be in 5 years' time? Zara, I'm going to go this way. Zara, you go first.
So I think we will credibly be using chat AI for customer servicing in different parts, not only of the finance sector, but also in other sectors as well. As we mentioned earlier, to what extent will be interesting to see, but I think that will have gazumped the usual chatbot model for especially the large players in the space, I would say.
Yeah.
Beyond that, it's difficult to predict, right? Isn't it? How many of us would have predicted this even back in 2020, for example? But I think, can it be that we'll start to have it to the extent where we will have digital avatars, or customers will have helpers in their pocket, and actually from a collections point of view, the first step will be us interacting with their digital agent before ultimately we end up speaking to the customer if the situation requires it. In 5 years' time, could be quite likely. You know, it all depends how quickly it advances.
Yeah. Okay. Richard?
I'd have to agree. I think chat AI is going to be the one for this time next year. Certainly, we're going to see that develop quite quickly and replace the traditional chatbot. And personally, I'm going to welcome that, because chatbots are difficult creatures to manage. In terms of a 5-year prediction, I mean, if we look back from 2020 to where we are now, it could be anything from an invasion from Mars to goodness knows who being in the White House.
Alien
But from a technology point of view, I don't think we're going to see any other greater advancements, whether it be metaverse or the AI element. I think it's going to be a lot of finessing of existing technologies for the next 5 years. Certainly within our industry. Outside of our industry, anything could happen.
Yeah. Okay. Frank?
This time next year, we'll be all talking about the metaverse again. No, we won't. I think that this time next year, if you ask the room how many of you are using AI in your day-to-day operation, a lot more people have put their hands up perhaps than would have done today. I believe that we will be down the path of moving from the age of digital transformation to the age of employee engagement. And I think the role of data will be even more visible and more important to this audience in financial services.
Okay, well, fabulous. Well, I've been taking notes, so
What's your prediction? Tell us yours.
My prediction, I don't know. You can't put me on the spot.
There,
You can't put me on the spot. I do think I think data is going to be important. I think going forward, I do wonder if the AI stuff has sort of reached a bit of a peak. So I think we're going to get to the reality of actually implementation of it. So I think it might take a year or so. So even some of these co-pilots, I think we'll start to see some of those, but I think it's going to take a year or so to go through. I think my view is that I think there's a lot of information in the data we've already got, and I think there's probably a lot of value in that today, which I think we can probably leverage. Whether we're talking about that next year, I think there could be something else we'll talk about next year, because we tend to talk about the hot topics, but I think that's the reality of where we are. That's kind of my view. So, does anyone disagree with me? Is anyone welcome
No,
to disagree?
I'm just hoping Everton will still be in the Premier League. So
Well, so I've been taking notes, and now you've made me put my notes down here. So we'll have the scorecard. We'll have the scorecard next year, hopefully, as well. So thank you very much to everyone on the panel. Really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone. So really appreciate it. I think we'll probably send this out. That's if people want to take the survey stuff I got out there as well. But I think really it's just really a bit of a thank you now to everyone across all of the speakers we've had. They're all listed here. Thank you. I think thank you everyone. So